So I just want to welcome everyone this afternoon to the launch of the Collaborate and Connect project report and toolbox. It's a project we're really proud of, so we're very happy to be here this afternoon sharing that with you. My name is Lizzie Harnett and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Association for the Wellbeing of Children in Healthcare. And before we begin, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands that we are each dialing in from today. Myself and Bella are in the Orch office, which is the land of the Wallumattagal people. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to any First Nations people here today. I'd also like to recognise and pay respect to First Nations children and young people whose determination, insight and lived expertise has been so vital to this project, but in general to shaping a much more equitable and just future for us all. The Collaborate and Connect project is a partnership between Orch and Health Consumers New South Wales. Orch is a national not-for-profit that's been advocating for the needs of children and young people and their families in the healthcare system since 1973. We've been embedding young people's voices into the systems and services they use, and that's at the core of our work, which is how we arrived at this project, and it's part of every single project and every single activity that Orch does. I'll hand over to Anthony, who's the Chief Executive Officer of Health Consumers New South Wales, to tell us a little bit more about himself as well and Health Consumers. Thanks, Anthony.
Well, there's always one. Thank you so much, Lizzie. My name's Anthony Brown. I'm the CEO of Health Consumers New South Wales, and Health Consumers New South Wales is just so excited to be partnering with this project with Orch. Health Consumers New South Wales is the peak body for health consumers, people who use health services in New South Wales. And we work really hard to provide a voice for patients, their family members and carers, patient leaders and health consumer representatives in New South Wales. And we want to make sure that health services, health policies and health research is the best it can be through the active involvement of health consumers in the design and governance of those projects. Before I hand over to Bella, I also would like to recognise those with lived and living experience across all communities and identities. The active involvement of people with lived and living experience of health, illness, disability, being a carer, using health services, and the impact and experiencing recovery and the impact of treatment on their lives. All of these experiences are so important. Healthcare absolutely needs to listen to and learn from these experiences. And I want to thank everybody who gives up their time to share these experiences. None of us could do the work we do without you and without it. So thank you very much. I now want to hand over to our project officer, Bella, to take us through the project and to the new toolbox. So over to you, Bella.
Thanks so much, Anthony. Well, hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon and for giving us an hour of your time this Reconciliation Week. As Anthony said, my name is Bella. I'm the project officer who led this work with Orch and Health Consumers New South Wales. Just a super quick overview of what to expect today. I'll give you an overview of the project, discuss our approach to the project as well. That was a huge part of it. The project findings and then the new resource. And then we'll also finish with a panel discussion with some of the awesome people who were vital to making this work happen. So I'll get started. So this project came about through feedback from our sort of general youth engagement project that we did in 2022 called Walking the Talk, where we received feedback that there was a real need for a similar project to that one, but specifically focused on engagement with First Nations young people. So that's where the idea sort of came about. And then obviously there is a sort of in health outcomes and service engagement, there's obviously a clear need for improvement, and improvement in engagement will hopefully lead to areas of improvement in outcomes as well. So the project itself was 2 workshops. We partnered with First Nations co-design facilitators from an organization called YLab to design and co-facilitate the workshops with young people. We had 1 in-person workshop and 1 online. We had 7 First Nations young people between the ages of 14 and 24 who participated as collaborators in the project. And then the overall aim was essentially to gather all the young people's insights, hear about their experiences and perspectives, and co-create a resource to support really authentic, respectful, and also effective engagement, specifically between non-Indigenous staff and organizations and First Nations young people. So out of this project, we've had some outputs. We have the final report where you can find all the project findings that I'm going to be talking about, which can be accessed through the link that I've put in the chat. That's also sort of sprinkled throughout the slides as well. And then we have what we're calling the Collaborate and Connect toolbox, which is an all-encompassing toolbox, which includes a new model for engagement that we developed, and the handbook accompanies the model and will help staff work through the model and put that into practice. So first, I'll just talk a little bit about our approach to the project. Several aspects of the project, both prior to the workshops and also during the workshops, were specifically identified by some of the collaborators as really particularly helpful and creating a welcoming environment, and made them confident in actually engaging with us in the first place. So we thought it would be really important to highlight those as those positive actions that we took and the direct feedback that we received. So this is a direct excerpt from the final report in section 1 about our approach, where we really got down to the nitty-gritty of everything that we did and the direct correlating feedback that we received, so that we can really exhibit how we went about the project and where the positive and negative feedback came from. So other areas, obviously we've got communication on the screen, but other areas include outreach. We used a mix of social media and other online and email forms of outreach, as well as physical promotion, flyers, on the ground promotion in local youth organizations and First Nations organizations, and also word of mouth, which ended up becoming one of probably the most successful channel of outreach for this project. Another aspect was graphic design. We had a lot of feedback about that. We made sure to represent a range of skin colors and disabilities in the project materials, in the graphics that we chose. And this was specifically identified by collaborators during the workshops as a factor that really inspired confidence in the project and actually pushed them to apply in the first place. As well as that, we used really collaborative methods and a huge focus on accessibility. And all the details about that are obviously in the report. And we had just sort of universally positive feedback about our approach with accessibility, really strong focus on not just physical accessibility and audio and visual accessibility, but also location, time of day, cost, all these things impact access. And yeah, we had really wonderful feedback about all of that, and you can read the details in the report. So the next section is the actual findings from the workshops. So what did the young people actually talk about and tell us? Workshop 1 was the in-person workshop. It was 6 hours. And we held it in Redfern at 119 Redfern Street. Beautiful venue. This project was specifically focused on the City of Sydney area, so that's why we chose Redfern specifically as well. So yeah, we had this beautiful, almost full day workshop. All just ended up spending the day essentially yarning, sharing experiences, perspectives, and ended up with some really insightful findings. So the first question we asked was about barriers. What stops First Nations young people from being a part of design? So some of the key themes that emerged were around tokenism and sort of performative engagement, organizations not actually being open to changing anything. Accessibility, ineffective outreach, and also First Nations injustice and a lack of cultural safety. So again, when we talk about accessibility, really encompassing that in sort of other things like location, time of day, cost to participate, cost to travel, all these things can impact access as well and need to be considered. Particularly, there's some really nuanced and complex things to consider when we're talking about young people as a specific demographic. So those are some of the barriers that were identified. And then we went on to talk about some enablers. So how can non-Indigenous organizations improve access to engagement, improve design processes, and improve their approach to engagement overall with First Nations young people? So these are some of the key themes that emerged. A strong finding was the need for staff to be educated on First Nations issues, and really committed to continuing that education and fostering that throughout their lives and throughout the time that they're engaging with First Nations young people. Other significant findings that came out in terms of enablers were collaboration, collaborative approaches and methods, a focus on accessibility, a focus on intersectionality as well, and decolonization were some of the really core themes that we talked about in terms of enablers. And then we moved on to talking about what they wanted in a resource, what a resource would actually look like for non-Indigenous organizations. What topics they thought a resource might need to address, whether it would be an educational-based resource, a reflective-based resource, a framework, a model, all these sorts of things. We discussed all the sort of nitty-gritty of all of that. And this is some of the findings that came out of that. The topics of intersectionality, cultural humility, and decolonization were identified as areas where more education and understanding is needed amongst non-Indigenous staff and organizations based on young people's lived experience and their perspectives on that. Other ideas in terms of the type of resource was a resource library. So bringing together all sorts of external resources and really curating that and continuing to curate and expand and update and stay up to date with the most up-to-date information. As well as that, there was ideas about a handbook with activities to really encourage really engaging with the content and reflecting, not just sort of a guidebook to read through, but something to actually sit down and think about and work through. And other ideas included a video series, a podcast series, all really awesome ideas from the young people that we then took away after workshop 1 and developed into a draft model. And then we presented that draft model and all the ideas that we'd sort of curated from workshop 1. We presented that to the young people in workshop 2 to get their feedback on how we've sort of interpreted everything, to clarify their ideas and to really refine our understanding of their ideas as well before we moved on to finalizing the model. So we then developed the final model that we have today and the accompanying handbook that does have reflective activities in it to help work through all the educational material. And we decided on a toolbox with several different tools, so we could all sort of bring that together, with the core resources in the toolbox being the model and the handbook, but also including a resource library, some templates, all sorts of stuff, which I'll show you in a moment. So this is the model. This has a bit of extra info on it at the moment. The actual model's much simpler, but it's grounded in 3 foundational concepts, which were directly identified by the young people as needing more attention from non-Indigenous organisations. So first of all, we have intersectionality, understanding how identities and oppressions, sources of oppression overlap, and the impacts of this on our own experiences, but also interpersonal interactions, relationships, in engagement settings, power dynamics, all these sorts of things. And this is particularly, the handbook goes into a lot more detail, but it's particularly important when we're thinking about the intersection of being a young person and being First Nations as well, and plus any other sort of identities that might be added onto that, and the ways that all of those intersect to create really nuanced experiences and really nuanced needs when it comes to engagement. Next is cultural humility. So rather than achieving cultural competence, we're focusing more on cultural humility, a lifelong commitment to self-reflection and learning, rather than doing a training session and like sort of achieving this level of competence. It's a lifelong active process, and similar to decolonization. So moving past decolonization as sort of an idea or a buzzword or a metaphor, and really thinking about it as a framework for action to dismantle the colonial system structures and ways of thinking, being and doing that are currently in place and not serving everyone. So the handbook works through each of the foundations in 4 steps. So education. So for example, if we're talking about intersectionality, which is the first part of the handbook, education, what is intersectionality? And we have all sorts of info and resources on that. And then it moves to reflection. What does intersectionality mean to me? What does it mean to other people? What does it mean when we're talking about it in terms of engagement and organizations? And then connection. How does intersectionality connect to the other foundations as a concept? How does it connect to me in my life? How does it connect to my practice? How does it connect to other people? How do we connect to communities? All these sorts of things. And then we move on to action. So what does intersectionality actually look like in practice when we're engaging with people? How can we incorporate the concept of intersectionality? And then that goes through all sorts of things like accessibility again, and all these sorts of considerations. So this is just some excerpts from the handbook to give us a bit of a better idea of what you can expect in terms of information and activities. I don't expect anyone to read this now. It's just to give a bit of an idea. So yes, in terms of what else the toolbox entails, we have the model, which when you go onto the web page for the toolbox, you'll see there's a A4 PDF of the model that you can download, print. We also have image files that you can download and use in your work. We have the handbook, which you can download and print if you desire. The resource library, which is a very, very long list of all sorts of external resources, information, articles, checklists, all sorts of tools from all sorts of wonderful organizations, all curated into categories. So you should be able to navigate through that fairly easily. And then we have the Plan and Design mini guide, which is based around section 1 of the final report, our approach, where we go through what we did and the direct feedback. We put that into a guide with a pretty comprehensive checklist, which can help organizations plan their engagement around that direct feedback that we received. The worksheets are the activities that are in the handbook, but you can access them as individual PDFs. And then we have templates. So we're going to keep expanding all of this, but at the moment with the templates, we have templates for a certificate. We use certificates of collaboration, we call them, just as recognition. A lot of young people can use them in resumes, things like that, or for school. It's a good way to recognize, as well as obviously remuneration, recognize their time and energy and emotional labor that they've put in sharing their experiences with us. So we've got a template for that you can download and print. We also have an editable version, and then a glossary, which again is going to keep being updated, and then a suggestion box as well. So that's just a feedback form in terms of the overall toolbox. We want to keep expanding and curating and updating. So we're open to any feedback, ideas, suggestions through there on an ongoing basis from now on. And we'll take all of that into consideration. So I will now stop sharing and we'll move on to our panel discussion. We actually have a bit more time than I expected, which is great. Just give me one moment while I figure all of this out.
While Bella is sorting out those issues, I'm just going to start by having a quick chat with Kelsey. Do you want to turn yourself back on, Kelsey?
Sure can.
So we're just going to start the chat, and then Bella will join us hopefully with Mia. So Kelsey, I know that you and Bella have worked really hard on this project to really get the initial planning right, in terms of designing how the workshops might work and to make them sort of as engaging and as accessible as they could be. Was there anything different about this project compared to other projects that you've worked on?
Yeah. Also, hi everyone. I'm Kelsey.
Oh, Kelsey, weren't you? Sorry, I should have
Don't
said
even.
who you were. Can you introduce yourself, Kelsey?
Yeah. So yes, I'm Kelsey. I'm from YLab. I'm the First Nations manager at YLab. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a Nyampa woman. My grandmother was born on Lake Jellicoe Mission, but I grew up partially in Griffith, New South Wales, and partially up in Newcastle, New South Wales, and now I'm living and working on beautiful Wurundjeri country, all the way south in Naarm, otherwise known as Melbourne. And yes, there was, I think, a lot of things quite different about this project. I think probably one of the biggest assets on it was how the collaborative process, and I know lots of projects are quite collaborative and quite open discussion, but I think there was it was very obvious that Orch, yourself, Liz, Anthony, at Health Consumers New South Wales, and Bella, the amount of care you took into wanting to make it a very positive experience for young people, and the ways you approached engagement while also acknowledging that this was a project seeking to understand how organisations can better engage with First Nations young people was quite cool and great to see you guys navigate that. And I think the approach, that was, I think, a lot of feedback that we got throughout the process from the young people that we had in our workshop, was the level of care that was taken leading up to the project. Bella was in conversation with all of the young people ahead of the workshop for quite a few weeks. A lot of projects have quite a short turnaround, but there was like a lot of relationship building with the young people for quite an extensive time ahead of the workshop. So then when we finally did have the workshop, the young people were so generous and so comfortable in the space. And yeah, I think that was really great. That was one of my favorite parts of the project.
Terrific. I had a lot of feedback about just the feel of it, that there was, that there was just without sounding, the vibe was kind of very positive and very safe, with some of the feedback that we got. Thanks, Kelsey. So moving on to the project findings, and I hope everyone reads the report in full, and has a really good look and trawl through the toolbox. It's really quite an amazing, I think, an amazing resource. And is going to be really, really helpful for lots of organisations engaging with First Nations young people. I don't think just limited to healthcare. I think it's quite usable across the spectrum. So how do you think the project findings and toolbox could now be sort of expanded upon and utilised? Where would you like to see this go? Obviously, this work's been very kindly funded by the City of Sydney, and we're very grateful to them for that. And so, yeah, where would you love if the sky was the limit, it was a green field, we didn't have to worry about resources, where would you like to see this go?
Yeah, I think I'd like to start off by just acknowledging that it's a resource for non-Indigenous organisations and people who are seeking to engage with First Nations people. And it's also been led by two non-Indigenous organisations. And I think that in itself is quite powerful, in that yous are quite leading the way in terms of allyship when it comes to First Nations engagement. Yous are really trying to bring your fellow non-Indigenous community workers, organisations, healthcare workers along that decolonial journey. And so when I think about how I'd like to see it expanded, I'd really like to see a more significant interest in reaching out for trainings, and a diverse, I don't know what the word is, but a diverse range of trainings. So like not just from First Nations orgs, like obviously that's very important to get First Nations people in to your organizations to understand where we're coming from that first point of contact. But I'd like to see more non-Indigenous organizations taking some of that cultural load and leading the way in terms of training and sharing knowledge with other non-Indigenous organizations and workers.
Fantastic. You were also involved with the Walking the Talk project, which predated this, and you had a lot to do with us then moving into doing this piece of work, which came from the young people and yourself, saying that, this was a gap that really needed to be addressed. What do you think in terms of, you spoke about one of the things that really came up from the project was this cultural load, and I have often felt this, but I hadn't had it articulated to me before nearly as well as the young people articulated that. Can you tell us a little tiny bit more about that, Kelsey?
Yeah, I think when we talk about the cultural load, I think it's very much that a lot of the time mob, when we're in identified positions, or even just quite often we are the only First Nations person in the room, in the team, and that can be quite a burden when it comes to organizations wanting to engage with First Nations communities. And So when we talk about the cultural load, we're talking about the pressures that are put on that individual or a small select group of people who work within non-Indigenous organisations to, I suppose, hold the hands of non-Indigenous people to do the decolonising work, to understand how to work with community and do that engagement to maintain cultural safety. And when we say we'd like to share the cultural load, and I think it's quite fitting that it's Reconciliation Week, we want non-Indigenous people to like take your part in it, like colonisation, all of the injustices and things like that that have led to the systems that we have today didn't just happen. They were built by people and they do cause harm to people. And so if we're wanting to undo that harm or minimize that harm, it can't just be from First Nations people doing it ourselves all the time. I think I'm also considering like thinking about how, you know, we held this workshop in Redfern, and a lot of Redfern's history come about because of like the Aboriginal Housing Corporation, and that was really mob doing things for ourselves and you know, not having access to adequate housing, not having access to adequate healthcare. That's why we've got so many community health organisations that are built by mob for mob, because there wasn't a space for us in the wider systems. And so when it comes to non-Indigenous organisations wanting to untangle that systems change work, particularly when it comes to including First Nations young people, First Nations people broadly, and our particularities, there is a significant cultural load that you need to take on to help make that pathway happen.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Kelsey. I can see Bella's back on the screen, and I'll see our tech issues. Mia's there as well, so I might hand back to Bella. Thanks, Kelsey. I think that's just really powerful way to finish our conversation, because again, like I said, that was one of my key light bulb moments when going through the feedback from the meetings and from, you know, the report generally. So yeah, over to Bella.
Thank you both so much for holding down the fort while I figured everything out, and thank you to Mia who's been dealing with tech issues this whole time.
Thank you so much for your help. Sorry it took me a while to jump on. Thanks.
Thank you for joining. So we'll get back to some of the questions, and Kelsey, obviously feel free to chime in as well. We don't have Shauna, unfortunately. She's an apology today. But Mia, thinking back over the first workshop in the project and the sort of lead up to that as well, I know you were sort of a last minute addition, I think. I think your cousin let you know about it like the day before, and we figured it out.
Let me know that it was going on. Yeah, exactly. So I was a late to join, but it was really accessible from the beginning. So I jumped in pretty smoothly.
Awesome. Was there anything in particular that made it accessible, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. From the start, it was just clear that it was a space made with mob in mind. So it was comfortable, thoughtful, and just having that yarn space where we didn't have to explain ourselves or water anything down. I could tell that it was really thoughtful space. And yeah, I think going into it, I was a mix of nervous and curious, to be honest. But even just the emails beforehand to the way we were welcomed into the space, it didn't feel rushed or tokenistic or anything. It was time to build trust. So that just made a huge difference.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It's so good to hear you say that. How did you feel after? Were you sort of excited?
Yeah, afterwards, I guess I just felt really uplifted. And I know Isaac, my cousin, feels the same. We've discussed it afterwards. Like we'd been properly listened to. and just included in shaping something meaningful and actually like actionable, something that we've seen be actioned on. It's just, it's a change for sure.
Yeah, cool. Thank you so much.
No problem.
What do you sort of, if you could say one thing maybe about sort of this general topic of engaging with First Nations young people, what would you want everyone to sort of take away from today?
I think the biggest thing would be that engagement with young First Nations people is not just a tick the box kind of thing. It's got to be real. So as I said before, just building proper relationships and actually listening. And I think as well, participants have to come in being willing to learn and also unlearn along the way. And we can tell when it's genuine and when it's not. So that's something that's was really impactful about this particular workshop. It was definitely welcoming and genuine.
Cool. Thank you so much. Kelsey, if you could say one thing, do you have anything in mind?
One thing in response to your question, or just one thing broadly about
just for everyone to take away today?
I think I want to leave you with my favorite quote that came out of the workshop that I've also been thinking about in my own work since. And that was, we're not hierarchy people, we are circle people. In that, you know, mob, I think a lot of the time in this work, in this decolonial work, we know it's a shared effort. Like, we know that a lot of non-Indigenous organisations are looking to mob to lead the way, but what it really needs to be is a collaborative approach. It really needs to be something that we share and walk towards together. So I think that's what I'd leave with.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate the both of you for joining. I'm sorry it was so much waiting for you, Mia.
No problem. Thanks for helping me out.
I might just, we do have a bit of extra time. I might unpin everyone, and I might reshare my screen and go through the toolbox a bit. I saw in the chat some people are having trouble with links. I will make sure that that's all working properly once we finish up today. But I'll just give us a bit of a rundown and show you what it actually looks like when you enter the web page. So give me one moment. Alrighty, I think that should be working. So this is the project main page where you can find info about the background, all those sorts of things, and then the toolbox, and then all the project documents. So the scoping report we did at the beginning has a lot of the data and research about the why, the obvious gaps in health outcomes and the disparities in all of the health data and everything like that, and also with engagement between the way First Nations people are engaging with First Nations organisations and with non-Indigenous organisations, and the disparity there between outcomes as well. So all of that research is in the scoping report. And then we go to the toolbox. And you can download a A4 of the toolbox, which has clickable links, but you can also print. It has QR codes all over it for each section. So that's a printable version that can be handed out and used. So we have the model, again, has the PDF and the visual resources, the full handbook with all the activities, all the info, the resource library with all of the links, all the different categories, accessibility, co-design, decolonization, truth-telling. There's ones about allyship, anti-racism, co-designing with young people in general, which includes our overall youth engagement guide, which is sort of a supplement. These two resources can go hand in hand as well. The plan and design guide with the checklist, the glossary, worksheets, templates, and then the suggestion box as well. So all of these links go to each of these sections. They're all very rich in content, thanks to the incredible insights from the young people. We couldn't have done it without them, obviously. So that's just a quick overview. And we might finish up early, I think, unless Lizzie or Anthony wants to say anything else. And then I'll wrap up. I will stop sharing. There we go.
I have nothing to add. The great insights from the project have already been shared. Just again want to add my thanks to all the young people who are involved, and Kelsey and her team who led us through the great process. And I suppose what I would like to emphasise is we've put a lot of time in this webinar to share our insights on the way we did things. And that's not so much to let you all know how wonderful we are, but that the process itself taught us so much about the ways to engage. And by actually doing it and listening to the young people and working really hard through the leadership of Bella through all of this, it's what was part of the learning and what's reflected in the report. And that emphasis around taking the time and listening and, creating a safe environment, which is all about relationship building and taking time, which is one of the big learnings for me about doing this work with First Nations young people properly. So again, really honoured that we're able to partner with Orch and everybody else in this project. Want to thank the support that we got from the City of Sydney in making this happen. And yeah, we want to work with everyone on the call to take this forward, to do what Kelsey said and work with other non-Indigenous organisations to make all of this happen. And yeah, please get in touch with Health Consumers in Orch about how we can work together to bring young people into your First Nations young people into your planning and governance.
And we might just finish off, Anthony, with the hugest thank you to Bella. And you have thanked them, but really the project couldn't have happened and certainly would not be the quality of the insights without Bella. So thank you so much, Bella, and obviously all the young people and Kelsey and YLabs. So
thank you both. I appreciate that. Just to wrap up, thank you everyone for joining today. Like I said, giving us an hour of your reconciliation week. It's greatly appreciated. Please reach out if you have questions. Again, I will get all the links working. Apologies for the technical difficulties today. But yes, any questions, opportunities, queries, areas where you'd like to potentially collaborate with us, please do reach out. And also let us know any thoughts you had about the webinar today. We'll pop the link in a follow-up email as well for that feedback form. But yeah, I guess I'll just leave it at that. Thank you everyone so much.